2B2T, the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft, has just spent the past 4 weeks in complete turmoil. An infamous group of hackers has been using an exploit against the entire server for the past 3 years in secret, and it's finally been revealed to the public. As someone who has covered Minecraft exploits for years, I can safely say this is the most powerful and destructive one I have ever seen. The ultimate coordinate exploit, capable of tracking the real-time movements of over 300,000 players across all 3 of Minecraft's dimensions. 15,000 bases were found using
3 dimensions? What do you mean 3 dimensions? And another? Uh-huh. So wait, they build in the end too? They but you always spawn, you always spawn at the dragon and then they build there? There's only one portal that goes to the... No, there are multiple strongholds. Right.
Using this exploit, there was nowhere to run or hide. It was used to grief countless builds and steal over 200 million Minecraft items from stashes. The group responsible was thought to have quit the server years ago, but they've been pulling the strings from behind the scenes the entire time. What's remarkable is that this exploit shows how fundamentally flawed Minecraft as a game actually is. One person even tried to warn the community that this was happening, but they were written off as crazy and no one listened. Prepare yourselves, for today we'll be discussing NoCom, the most powerful exploit in Minecraft history, explaining who discovered it, how it was possible from a technical perspective, and the complete and utter destruction it caused. This video has been 3 years in the making and has required months of research and gathering testimony. So, if you consider hitting that subscribe button, you are an absolute... They actually succeeded at their plan and had access to admin powers, but it was short-lived and they eventually lost them. Many members of the nerds would go inactive, and for a couple of years, not much was heard from them, until 2 years later, in 2018. 2 players, Ox22 and Bubba J,
Top
were
Dono
both
here
server
is the
regulars
ultimate
that
tuber link.
had an interest in Minecraft exploits. They had recently discovered a way to crash the server by loading a massive amount of chunks at the same time. The most simple thing you can do in Minecraft is breaking a block, and to do this, you need to click on it. What the exploit did was click on blocks everywhere across the map, even if they were out of render distance. This forced the server to use an incredible amount of resources attempting to load chunks that had never been visited by players. Thousands upon thousands of chunks were loaded in a matter of seconds, causing incredible amounts of lag, and eventually the server would crash. Instead of abusing this new exploit right away, Ox and Bubba J started theorizing how it could be used to their advantage. There was a way that they could turn this crash exploit into a coordinate exploit, but they needed the proper conditions first. You see, the majority of multiplayer servers in the Java edition of Minecraft run something called PaperMC, which fixes bugs and makes the game more stable. Occasionally though, a bug fix can lead to a vulnerability that can be exploited to someone's advantage. Anytime there was a server-breaking exploit, 2B2T's admin, Housemaster, would have to report the issue to PaperMC. If they could crash the server to produce a specific out-of-memory message to House, he would report the bug. The most obvious fix to this would be to have chunks only respond to the server if they were loaded by a player, which could reveal someone's location. It was genius. The two shared their plan with a close friend named Frickin, who was a member of Nerds Incorporated, the same group that tried to take over the server in 2016. He confirmed that their plan could work if Paper developers were to implement the obvious fix. And so, they set their plan into motion.
This
In
player
July
is
of
frozen.
2018, they would begin crashing the server as fast and hard as they could, making it unplayable. Each crash would notify House that players were attempting to click blocks out of render distance, and it was causing the server to go haywire. He reported the issue to paper on July 12th, and later the very same day, the exact bug fix the group was hoping for was implemented. When attempting to click blocks out of render distance, the server would only give a response if a chunk was loaded by a player. They now had the proper conditions for their coordinate exploit, and the following day, July 13th, they had their first working version, but it was very primitive. They would keep an AFK account in the overworld, and it would attempt to click blocks in all chunks leading away from spawn in a spiral pattern. If a chunk responded, it would send the coordinates privately in chat. Any chunks that gave a response were then charted on a graph. Bubba J would begin using the exploit to find and destroy item stashes, which started a panic in the community. Wanting to keep the exploit as low profile as possible, Frickin suggested a name for it: NoCom, short for no comment. This way, if the exploit name was somehow leaked, it wouldn't raise any red flags. As a member of Nerds Incorporated, Frickin told the others in the group about the exploit, and they were brought into the circle of trust. In August of 2018, I released a video discussing the crash exploit that had already been patched, but while doing research for that video, I asked Bubba J if he knew anything about the exploit. He replied with no comment. Little did I know at the time, he was actually telling me the name of the exploit. It was hiding in plain sight, and we were all oblivious to it. In the following months, the primitive version of the exploit would prove to be tedious. It was slow, resource intensive, and there was no easy way to differentiate between actual bases and simple dirt huts. In most cases, the charted chunks were just empty wilderness. There was also no easy way to tell which specific player was in the loaded chunks. They needed some sort of automation. Enter Lejerve, a talented programmer and the lead developer of Baritone, a program that automated actions in Minecraft. Lejerve had legitimate experience with machine learning, so the nerds requested his help in making the exploit more powerful. He accepted the challenge and was brought into the circle of trust. Over the next few months, his contributions would change everything.
Jesus,
the first order of
man.
business was
What
making
is wrong with
searches
the
more
server?
efficient. A program was taught to follow players once it identified them. They were located by running checks all the way up and down 2B2T's major highways, and then followed them to wherever they were going. Instead of searching in a spiral pattern starting at spawn, an adaptive tracking system would predict where players were headed. The easiest way to describe this exploit is like a game of Battleship, and the enemy ships are players on the server. You can't actually see where they are, and no matter what spot you choose to fire on, your opponent must tell you whether you hit a ship or you've missed. On 2B2T, your opponent is the server itself, and instead of firing missiles, you're trying to click blocks in chunks that you can't see. The server has to tell you whether a chunk you clicked on was loaded or not loaded. After it learned to track players, the program would use probability association to identify them. It would notice when specific accounts were connecting and disconnecting from the server. If a trail of chunks was suddenly unloaded at the same time someone disconnected, it began to associate that username with the chunk trail. So after 2 or 3 disconnects, it had a clear idea of who was actually in those chunks. This also allowed the program to chart how far a player had gone in a specific session of Minecraft. By this point, AFK accounts were being used in all 3 dimensions, so all player movements were being tracked. Lejerve shared with me how the math behind the adaptive tracking system works for this video, and as you can see, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. From there, the program was taught to search all incoming chunk information for unnatural blocks, such as shulkers, stained glass, beacons, multiple chests, etc. If these blocks were found, The program would then recreate the chunks in a separate instance of Minecraft. What you are looking at is an actual 2B2T base being reconstructed in real time. The program has identified these chunks as a legitimate base. It's taking the block information and comparing it to what should be there on 2B2T seed, which is publicly known. After running the check, it then displays what is different. Once the process is complete, the world download is automatically stored on a separate database. This feature effectively gave the nerds a form of spectator mode and allowed them to see what was happening in any loaded chunks on the server. Here, you can see an after-the-fact visualization made from years-old data collected on the average base. This one is named Electric Boogaloo. You can see how it starts from nothing, just a few random checks per chunk. Then it grabs and explores areas that are likely to be part of the build. It even goes back and rechecks sections periodically to see if any changes have been made. With all of these adaptive programming changes, Lejerv would combine them with the nerd's original exploit.
That's
what
pretty cool.
happened next was nothing short of incredible.
But what are they gonna do with the information?
The NOCOM exploit was now the most powerful in Minecraft history. They were visually tracking every single player movement on the entire server in real time at 1 second intervals. Every chunk trail, base location, and player logout spot was now compromised. Heat maps allowed them to see where the most player activity was happening at all times. They would acquire so much data using this exploit that everything I've mentioned so far is just the tip of the iceberg. It was the ultimate power, and the nerds had to show an incredible amount of restraint in using it. Because it was possible due to a paper vulnerability, this meant that the exploit could work on other servers as well. There was truly nowhere to hide. The exploit had to be kept a secret, and to do that, the group would have to feed the community false information for years to keep them from finding out the truth. Anytime there was evidence of a coordinate exploit being used on the server, the nerds would brush it off as paranoia, or make up a different exploit with enough believability that people would buy it. What they were effectively doing was gaslighting. In the English language, one way to describe gaslighting is convincing a person that their memories of an event are not accurate. For example, let's say that when you were a young child, your parents took you to an amusement park griefing of many prominent bases on the server, such as Space Valk 3, the Ice Dragon at Niflheim, the Great Tree, and many more.
What did they do with
Sometimes
it?
accounts would have to be used in order to maintain the rate at which data was pulled from the server. Lejerv would also have to retool his machine learning program to overcome these limits. After a few months of downtime, the exploit was back up and running more efficiently than ever. But realizing that more data limits could effectively shut them down, they decided that showing restraint in using the exploit was no longer an option. Of the group members, Ox22, Bubba J, and Lejerv were all members of a separate organization called the Spawn Masons, who had become well known on the server for many of their ambitious projects. The three began taking large amounts of stash coordinates from the NOCOM database and began providing them to the Masons with no questions asked. A subgroup of the Masons, led by a player named Dectonic, would scout out each stash for useful building blocks and decide whether to give it up to the group to steal or destroy it.
They can't see with their spectator tool what's in the chests though. They can only see that that block is a chest, right? So how can they scout? I don't get it. How can they scout that? They know the coordinates. They can see the contents too. How can they see the contents of the chest? It just tells you whether or not what block is there. Oh, they went there live and scouted.
Over the course of 2020, the group would steal from and then destroy hundreds of stashes around the server. They did this so that the group would have more resources at its disposal. In total, the Masons would acquire more than 200 million Minecraft items from these stashes. it was clear that anyone able to use the no-com exploit had a major advantage over everyone else. While the exploit was running flawlessly, and House was still unaware of the original vulnerability, someone began to notice that something was not right. A player named ZeroNeb realized that there were at least 4 accounts logged into the server 24/7. Being able to stay online without getting AFK kicked is very hard, so multiple accounts doing it instantly raised a red flag. ZeroNeb began to suspect that the accounts were being used for an exploit of some kind, and he started inquiring about it. His original messages to the nerds had been ignored, but upon mentioning the AFK accounts, he was surprised to see them respond. They dismissed his claim as paranoia and that he was being ridiculous. ZeroNeb would attempt to bring these findings to the attention of the greater community, but he was either ignored or laughed at. The nerds would actually program one of their AFK accounts to randomly message Neb with random strings of Morse code from time to time, fueling his paranoia to all-time highs. The nerds would spend the rest of 2020 trolling ZeroNeb, raiding stashes, and continuing to expand their database of locations. But in 2021, another group of 2B2T players would stumble upon the original paper vulnerability. Enter Steve 3, Mahan, and Redstoner, 3 associates of a group called the Infinity Incursion. They had developed a brute force version of the exploit, but far more primitive. At first, they used it to observe the highways, but after some optimizations, they were able to find base and stash coordinates just like the nerds could. But when it came to tracking players, real